place. This is going to be our webinar 1 of the FAO shared training. We're going to focus today on stakeholder processes and relationships. And
sorry, we're not seeing your PowerPoint screen.
Oh, it says I'm sharing. Sorry.
We're seeing your background. It is lovely, oh, well, but it's not our slides.
No, that's not even the right countries. Let me just see what I can do. If I need to unshare. Apologies, it's worked almost every time before.
No, I can share for you.
Yes, please, Sabrina, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. I'm not quite sure what's happening here. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, again, let's get started. Thank you and welcome to the FAO shared training. So today we're going to be focusing in on stakeholder processes and relationships. And just as we get started, we'd like to invite you to fill in a poll. And so Sabrina's going to share the poll. And we want to ask you how you're feeling today. You can actually choose multiple, but maybe only one. Are you in top form? Are you energized? You can't complain. Woohoo! Not quite awake in some cases, or feel like you're walking in mud. All right, we've got 60% of the votes. Oh, look at this. So this is great. We've got most people energized and in top form. And we also have a lot of people who feel like they can't complain. So we're really happy to hear that. Fantastic. All right, so appreciate you sharing those. And then the next thing what we would like to do is, we can stop sharing this, yes? Okay. The next thing we'd like to do is just do a quick check-in. We were all supposed to be together in Senegal, or many of us, and to do this training face-to-face. And so we wondered if you just use your chat box to let us know what's changed for you since March. We've all had a lot of changes. What's changed for you? Are we getting some responses in the chat box? I see people typing, but I can't see the chat box. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, Mika said she's been home. Oh, canceled wedding. New normal, missing the field. Working from home most of the time. Welcome, Zoe. Working from home, no project site visits. Life has turned upside down. It's a good descriptor. And coping with work from home. Well, and the pandemic has really changed how we work. We work less hours in the office. Yeah, it's all about staying safe, but at the same time trying to stay connected. So we're really happy that we have this opportunity to come together. And so I think while we're still going on gathering information, we have another poll, and we'd like to invite you to say which of these categories best describes you. Project coordination, M&E, field activities, link to government or relevant ministries, project partner, or other. And we welcome you to chat in the chat box if it's other. All right, we've got a great range of people. This is brilliant. All right. Okay, most people have voted. We'll wait for a few more. Okay, and yeah, so greatest percentage is project coordination, then link to government and relevant ministries, M&E, field activities, and project partners. All right, so thank you so much. Here are the results. Or have we shared the results? Thank you. All right, so just to quickly, I just wanted everyone, if you have your video, to take just a second, if you can come on video, if you're not already, and just let's have one wave before we jump into our work. This is our introduction, because we can't be in the same room introducing ourselves. Good wave, Anthony. Brilliant, all right. Happy to see everyone. Oh, so lovely. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, so we shall get started. First of all, we'd like to introduce our training team, and at this time I'm going to invite them to wave. So my name is Constance Neely, and Sabrina Chesterman is here. Mika Bourne is here. She's waving, and Emily Smith-Dumont is also here, and she's waving. Great, so this is the team today. And one of the things I just wanted to mention as we get started is this is a joint training between the FAO, the shared team, the Shared Decision Hub, and also ICRAF. So that is the background of this, and we are associated with component 1 on the science policy interface. Anne-Sophie is the lead on that, and she'll be joining a bit later. All right. So, Sabrina? So if you don't mind, please mute if you're not speaking to the group. So just the overview of the training process. We have had the opportunity to talk to most of you and a consultation interview where we learned an enormous amount. So today we're doing webinar 1 with the focus on stakeholder processes and relationships. Then there's going to be a 2-week time frame before the next one, in which we are going to work or invite you to work among yourselves to think about how to apply some of these tools. We'll come back in 2 weeks' time and talk in depth on policy engagement and evidence-based decision making. And then we will be here to support work planning as we go forward. So that's the training overview, and the overall objectives now for our work is we want to introduce a systematic approach for influencing policies and decisions. We're going to be using the shared method. We want to provide tools, approaches, and methods tailored to the country programs. And we want to share lessons and experiences among ourselves around stakeholder engagement and influencing policies and practices and programs. And then we want to support the projects to develop proposed pathways for integrating some of these tools into the future work. So those are our training objectives. So our now just want to show you, because we did have the conversations with each and every one of you, And one of the things we wanted to highlight is how many amazing things are happening in the countries. So you can see by your country, and we only had room for a little bit, so I know there's more great things that you're doing. But there's a lot of work on cross-sectoral activities, on support to rural organizations, policy development with strong stakeholder engagement, and then we have land use planning that facilitates action plans. So there's enormous amount, and apologies if I don't read off all of them, but we're really excited because that means each and every one has some lessons to share back. So now just to say how today is set up. So we're going to be talking about the shared process, and we've got a special guest from Turkana who is going to share a Turkana case study with you. That's in Kenya. We're going to talk a bit more about what you asked for the training, and then we're going to go into 3 blocks of sessions. So session 1 is going to be around digging into tools on mapping and influence. We'll have Q&A, and Q&A can happen all the time. Just register in the chat box. We'll have a stretch, and then we're going to go into tools related to deepening relationships, more Q&A, and then we're going to talk about applications to the country for the country projects, and we'll close out at the 2-hour mark. So that's the flow of today. And just, I think everyone now is a Zoom expert, but just please mute if you're not speaking. Questions are welcome all the time in the chat box. When we're having a Q&A session, if you want to speak, you can raise your hand. That is a symbol on your Zoom screen. And just as we're doing, make sure you have some water or something to keep yourself comfortable. We will have stretch breaks, and then we will, following the session, be sharing the slides of this session, the recording of this session. So those will be available on the RFS website. Anne-Sophie is now just joining. So I would recognize her. Just 1 minute. So the next slide is the shared framework. And I'm just going to check. I think we will invite Anne-Sophie to make closing remarks. And so, but we're welcome Anne-Sophie very much to the room. So I'm going to briefly talk about the shared framework, and then we'll go into a case study. So just to give a little bit of background, the Shared Decision Hub was founded in 2012. We are a collective of scientists from different disciplines and behavioral scientists, and we are founded on the principle of evidence-based decision-making, and we tailor our approaches for stakeholder engagement, managing relationships, and brokering partnerships. And we're working now in multiple contexts and also in 17 countries. So I think that the next slide, just to give a little bit of background, we take a human-centered approach, and we use that process and science to shift decision culture. So I won't go into too much detail on this, other than just to say we link science, practice, and policy. Our work globally has been, is shown here. So we've worked predominantly across Africa, and we've also done global work, and then we're also working in Asia. So it's in a lot of different contexts. So just to get started on the framework. So this is our shared framework. We start with a phase of context, integrate evidence, prioritize and plan, and learn and respond. Throughout the process, we work through stakeholder engagement, participation, and constantly bringing data, evidence, knowledge, and creativity. So just going into those phases briefly. So around those 4 phases, we also have devised 7 key principles. So we take a systems approach to manage complexity and interrelationships. We broker knowledge. We go at finding the root cause and the behavioral drivers of the problems we're all trying to address. We build decision-making capacity. We facilitate deliberative dialogue. And you will hear us a lot talking about cross-sectoral and multi-stakeholder engagement, which I'm so happy this group is working on so much. And we take a people-centered approach. And so with that, I'll go on just to go a little bit into each phase. And I'm going to do this quite quickly, but we have a context phase. And here we spend a lot of time figuring out where we want to go, where the group wants to go, mapping stakeholders, reflecting on what the situation is, looking at causal analyses, and developing an engagement plan. And if you look across the middle of the screen, what you're going to see is a number of tools where that we bring to the table for that context, with an outcome around a clear understanding of the socio-ecological context, issue analysis, and we enhance collaboration among the diverse stakeholders. That is the result of that phase. The second phase is around integrating evidence. And in this case, we focus on really gathering the evidence, building the capacity to interpret evidence, making sure it's visually accessible, and ensuring that it is packaged in a way that's actionable. So we have a number of tools, again, and just our definition of evidence is that we say evidence includes the raw numbers, the raw data, the words, images, and insights emerging from different knowledge sources. So it's not always going to be science-based. It can certainly be local knowledge-based. And so we use a number of tools, again, across this phase to ensure that there's really an evidence culture as a result, and there's a clear role of getting this data to support decision making. So the third phase is much more around prioritizing and planning. And again, this is about convening those knowledge exchange, getting people to negotiate what they're actually going to put in place, understanding plausible futures, and developing strong interrelationships to actually operationalize those plans. So I'm not going to go into the details, but this is where you get to your strategic planning. And last but not least, we have a learn and respond phase, and this is very much around this participatory M&E, jointly reflecting and improving our efforts. And again, a number of tools that we bring to the table. So the next slide, sorry, I can't see ahead. I wanted to ask you in the chat box, what tools, methods, and approaches have you found the absolute most useful when influencing either stakeholders or policy processes? What tools have really worked for you?
And if anyone has an intervention, they can also raise their hand if there's something specific.
Well, I think I see a couple of people writing, but we will leave that. Please do continue to add those to the chat box, because we're very much keen on what you feel are tools that you've used that really helped work, get the stakeholder processes going or the policy processes moving forward. I'm not yet seeing any responses. So with that, I'm going to, but we will welcome those registries. I would invite Sabrina and she's going to introduce our special guest.
Thank you so much, Constance. And just apologies, I might have to reconnect. We have nationwide power cuts at the moment in South Africa. So if I do go off, one of the other colleagues will share their screen. So apologies, but I will be back shortly. Yeah, we're very honored to have with us the Director of Planning, Victor Lakaram from Takana. And he's been one of our sort of longest standing partners that we've been working with the Turkana County government in northern Kenya for almost 7 years now on various different applications of the shared framework and process. So I will just give a very brief introduction in terms of how the partnership came about and how the shared tools and methods have been used in Turkana County. And we're using this example really to help the Resilient Food Systems country projects think about how to integrate or thinking about the potential of policy and institutional work. This is the reason for giving you a kind of example and application. So thinking about how some of these tools and methods could be applied in your country projects. So in terms of the policy and institutional context of Turkana, we do have a number of colleagues from Kenya joining us, so I'm sure this is quite familiar, but Kenya is a devolved constitution, meaning that there's 47 different counties in Kenya that all have their own county government structure. And this happened from 2010. And Turkana is right up in the northwestern corridor of Kenya, and it's a very dryland area, and historically has been quite politically marginalized. So really with devolution, things have really changed for Turkana County, and really one of the big aspects that came about with devolution is for each county to come up with their own integrated development plan. So in terms of setting a policy aspiration, back in 2015, and unfortunately Amate couldn't be here with us as well, but the chief then of Finance and Economic Planning, Amate Namur, had basically requested that really we need to be making decisions based on outcomes, despite at that time the multiple risks and in fact some of the risks that still continue to plague Turkana right now. So really this request stemmed from different development partners providing resources. So the government was getting a lot of requests from development partners coming and saying, we want to do this or invest in that, etc., etc. But really, they were not coming based on their needs. And also the county felt that a lot of the resource distribution was made just basically on a silo or per ward. So instead of need, like does one sub-county need more resources for health or for land restoration versus another one. So with this policy aspiration, linking up with the shared team, we basically came together to see which other partners were working in this area and how could we leverage some partnerships and some funding together to work and help and provide support towards the Turkana County government. So that was a partnership that we spurred with the government, the Turkana County government, the USAID Resilience Program, as well as UNICEF, that grew over time and multiple partners entered there. So this was basically the start of a relationship of the shared team providing technical backstopping to the Turkana County Finance and Planning Department, which, as I mentioned, started back in 2014 and continues to date. So just to quickly run through some methods and approaches that we have used and applied over the various meetings and convenings and different needs within Turkana. We've done a lot in terms of the County Integrated Development Plan process, which is basically setting a 5-year planning document together for the county. A lot around vision setting, mapping systems within Turkana, and also doing a lot of unpacking of root cause analysis. So again, when we were looking at how is the allocation to different areas, how can we counteract this, etc., some of these tools came into play. And this is what you're going to learn a little bit later in the session. We also looked to map decision cycles and amending the budget cycle for specific points of engagement. So we were saying, where are key decisions taken? Where is budget allocation made, both on a monthly and annual basis? And how can we assist with this process, and how can we understand it a little bit more? And this resulted in looking at maybe amending some aspects of the annual planning and budgeting cycle, and looking at where we could bring in key pieces of evidence and different focal points, etc. We also spend a lot of time in terms of engagement. This would be in the form of meetings, in the form of different multi-stakeholder, different cross-sectoral engagements, workshops, one-on-one meetings, face-to-face, public participation, community gatherings, leveraging of the church, etc. And then also in terms of evidence, there was a lot of focus in terms of, could we co-design access to evidence? Could we bridge sectoral evidence, so across sectors, and also the value of evidence? So yeah, we've spent a lot of time looking and working across different tools, and then resulting in terms of planning. So looking at developing these transformative flagship programs, and then also in terms of investments and different partners and their development needs. So coming up in terms of the County Integrated Development Plan, a sort of very novel outcome was looking that different sectors put money together to come up with flagship programs to deal with the same issue. So I will now like to invite Victor to come on and to carry on, and basically from his expertise and his very esteemed role in terms of directive planning, to just run us through some of the outcomes of this work to date, but also in terms of some of the lessons learned and any kind of advice he can give towards the Resilient Food Systems country programs. So Victor, if you would like to continue.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think I'll take it up from here. I think my main role will be to share with the participants, especially on the achievements of the shared process, what we've been able to do over the years. Yes, you know, when we started, we had a lot of challenges. I mean, the evolution was still new. It's something that we're getting used to. We had a lot of challenges. We didn't know what to prioritize, what should we look at. But then through the shared process, we were able to come up with a root cause analysis where we would look at issues in depth to find out what was the root cause. And we looked at this across sectors. And we were able to come up with several outcomes. One of them was, I mean, we looked at issues to do with gender, people living with disability. We were able to look at the issues that affect both the urban poor and the rural poor. We were also able to look at the issues that affect land health, things like that. We had a lot of problems with our resources. We had, the basket was getting smaller. So we paid a lot of attention to ensure that we deliver projects as we identified in our county integrated development plan. One of them was resource mobilization. And here we came up with different programs and the way to go about it. So our CIDP, here is it, here's a copy. Then for this we had to do, and we had to track this CIDP using the County Indicator Handbook and others. And then during this process, there was a lot of training that had to be done. We had to seek a lot of consensus building with the county assembly, partnerships with different partners. Then we had a lot of analysis together with the shared team. We looked at different tools, and here we had collected a lot of data on every aspect of Turkana, poverty, insecurity, and others. And then now we came up now with the implementation framework of the CIDP, which is a chapter in the CIDP. And with this, we think that this process really assisted us to ensure that we influence policies and decisions using the shared approach. so that you can come up with evidence-based decision making. So in our original CIDP, which was the first one, here it is. We weren't able to come up with concrete results. Yes, we could see projects coming up here and there, but then measuring that impact was a bit quite difficult. But I can assure you with the second CIDP and with the indicator handbook, we are able to track this on a quarterly, media, and half-year, and an annual basis. And then shared has assisted us a lot to overcome different hurdles. And one of them, for example, is when you involve a lot of stakeholders, then you get a lot of consensus building, you get a lot of buy-ins. And with this, I can list a few projects, like we were able to develop the refugee integration program. It is the only one in the world. It's a pilot in Turkana County. Here, we've been able to mobilize more than 100 million USD using the World Bank, UNHCR. We have a lot of partners like the Lutheran World Federation and others. We've also been able again to come up with delivery as one project in Turkana County, where we get hold of all the UN agencies in Kenya, and then we come up with one work plan and implement all that in the county. So, we don't actually think, we are saying that this process has really brought a lot of change and a lot of interest in Turkana County. So recently, another program was launched. There's also another $1 million USD program. And currently, we've already started embarking on the implementation of this project. And what we are doing right now, we are doing now the studies. We want to get more data for decision making so that, so that we know what to do. Actually, this program, we do not have set projects. It is from doing evidence-based research. Out of this is when you're going to get the projects. So again, we established our resource mobilization directorate, and some of these things that I'm telling you, including working with our highway authority to come up with projects for around 2.3 billion Kenya shillings. That's around $23 million. So the thing is, I'd like to advise you is that, normally you might understand the importance of these processes, but then you really need to talk to your leaders, sit with them, explain to them how these processes can actually achieve and bring a more desired outcome to their programs.
Super.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Victor.
Yeah. So, okay, just let me finish it off. I'd just like you to get 4 points. Number one, involve everyone from the beginning. Build on relevant competencies from different stakeholders. Number three, the most important, build consensus with everyone. And then number four, always give feedback. That's it. Thank you.
Great, Victor, we're going to need to write down those 4 pieces of wisdom so that we can share those. We'd ask you to put those in the chat box just now. But thank you so much to Victor. He's been one of our longest term partners with the Shared Decision Hub. I'd now like to just open the floor to any questions that some of the country teams might have for Victor in terms of evidence-based decision making or policy development, institutional aspects. Is there any teams or questions from the different country projects that you would like to ask for Victor? If you can raise your hand, Constance will be able to invite you.
Anthony's already raised a question. Anthony, would you speak it to the floor, please? Anthony, yeah, there you go.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Sabrina and Victor. Some good lessons in there. partly the question perhaps is answered, but probably he can delve into it a little bit more, and I'll add a rider to it. My first question was, how long did this process take? And I noticed you already had two, a first CIDP phase and then a second CIDP phase. But given the 4 points wisdom, I think it would be good to hear from you. Through that is a little political process, through the country process. What was your the highest point, and what were your lowest moments? You know, that time you felt like, oh, this will never work or something like that. Victor?
Victor, I think you're on mute. Okay.
Well, thank you for that question. Well, we did not start off immediately. We had a lot of meetings with ICRAF. And then we decided now to formalize that using an MOU. But I can tell you the amount of work that we put there, not less than 2 years. We put in at least 2 years of work. On the highest points is that, you know, sometimes when you sit with the politicians and they tell you, we know our problems, why do you need to bring people from outside so that we can listen to you? And we are like, yes, we understand that, but the evidence says this. For example, there's a road that we were supposed to do from Lodwar to the lake. You're aware one of the longest lakes, the only desert lake in Africa is in Turkana. So it's actually a tourist attraction site. And there was a lot of emotions that road should be developed to attract visitors. But then when we looked at the numbers and the data, I mean, it was not adding up. And when we sat with the politicians and we showed them the data, then we did another road, a similar road, but now to another point of the lake where we have a lot of fisher folk. So this one made more sense because we had, we have a lot of fish harvest and things like that, rather than the one for the tourist attraction site. So I can tell you this is one of the results that we're able to show and change through evidence. Thank you.
Victor, do you have a low point? Anthony also wants to know the low points.
Oh, that was, the low point was, I already mentioned the low points is where it was just the process of getting the buy-in from the politicians. Sure. Yes, the highest point, yes. The highest point is one time when we had to present to the governor some of our work, and he was very impressed, and he said, and he actually issued a circular that every project must have some sort of analysis before it is approved. I mean, we should be able to show whether it has a positive net present value, or if it has value for money and things like that. So I think that was a very big achievement in Turkana County. So we have to do pre-feasibility and appraisal studies for projects, which in the first term, we did some projects that up to now, we can't see whether there was value for money or whether they're delivering for the people.
And we have a question. Thank you so much, Victor. We have a question from Habib, please. If you can unmute, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Victor, for your presentation. My question is actually, if I get you right, you mentioned during your explanation that it's like your findings, you are not able to disseminate it or to share it. It's like one of the difficulties that you come across. So if my memory serves me right, I got you right. It is strange to me to hear that the findings is difficult to disseminate or to share. That's what I need more information about it, unless if I didn't get you right.
Oh, yes. Yes, what I meant is that, you know, when you decide to apply a scientific way of, trying to justify some of the interventions that you're doing, if you just disseminate that information to the politicians or to the stakeholders, then you might be unable to actually justify, or I mean, to bring the point home. So sometimes, as much as you employ the scientific methods to do your analysis or some of the tools that you use, then you really need to bring it to a level whereby your stakeholders can be able to understand how and why you've come up with that kind of a decision. And then still try to see how you can make that project bankable using the data that is there. Are you going to scale down? Are you going to increase the scope or things like that, so that you can make that project bankable?
Thank you. Thank you. And there's one last question, and that was, what legal framework is required to put the resource mobilization unit in place? And I think this may be our last question. What legal framework?
Yes, Mr. Frederick, yes. When you look at the PFM Act towards the last chapters, you will be able to see that resource mobilization is actually a function that is defined in law. It is just for your county governor, maybe through the county executive committee, to just have it approved at that level and just send instructions to the county public service board, whereby they can be able to establish that office. Because the establishment and abolishment of offices is through the county public service board. But then the Public Financial Management Act gives you that function, including others like partnerships is there. You have the normal, the procurement, the accounts. We have the monitoring and evaluation, planning, and the budget function, also given by the PFM Act. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, we do have one more question, and I apologize. I apologize for not recognizing. So Eswatini, SMLP representative, please give us your question. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My apologies for coming late. I couldn't introduce myself. It's Lynn Kota. I wanted to find out from Victor, really, to say that what is the how do you get over, or did you have any hindrances in terms of data mining from stakeholders, and if so, how did you go around that? Because we are finding that is one of our major issues. We are not getting data from the stakeholders so as to, the dashboard to be, relevant to all the stakeholders, to the country, really, in order to have, evidence-based decision making. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn.
Okay, I can see two. Well, let me respond to that, Constance. I can see two questions. One on the MOU, and then this one for the data mining. Well, the MOU is available. I don't know whether I can share with it publicly. Maybe I can share with you through your email. I can send it to you so that you can have a look at it. But what I can tell you, it was a non-binding, it was a non-financial kind of MOU between ourselves and ICRAF. It was not a financial, it didn't have the aspects of, it was actually a non-financial MOU, so that we don't have parties again. And then just outlining the way we are going to work, how if we come to a disagreement, how we'll work about it and things like that. And what we need to, how we intend to achieve what we have set. So just I can share with you. And then on the issue of data mining, that was, I can tell you, that is what took a lot of our time. Just like in Turkana and many other marginalized counties in Turkana, we have a lot of high staff turnover. So you will find somebody will come to the office 2 years, collects the data, the next point, or the next minute he's transferred to another point in the country. So there's it was quite stressing to get data. But then somehow we zeroed down to what we really needed. And then we also collaborated with our national statistics body, known as the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, whereby they collect and they have data for a lot of the areas that we needed. But from this difficulty and from what we're able to come up with our county integrated development plan, one of them is to ensure we establish the statistics unit, which we have done, and which up to now, we produce the annual statistical abstract so that we can start this issue of knowledge management on data about Turkana, so that in future, when you want to plan, at least we have data that is available and that is published in a source that can be easily accessible.
Thank you for that. Okay, I know there are more questions emerging, Victor, and so, but I'm afraid we're going to have to move forward. We're a bit short on time, but you may want to stay and maybe respond to a couple of the questions in the chat box. And also the very first question is, can you please put those 4 principles that you stated at the end? If you could put those in the chat box, that would be fantastic. And may I just invite everyone to give Victor a round of applause. And I think some of your fellow Kenyan colleagues, you may have a longer conversation sometime. Thank you so much, Victor. Okay. We really appreciate you joining us.
Yes,
thanks
I will also,
everyone. Yes, Victor?
I will put my email address. I will put my email address in the chat box so that if anyone needs any material or any further questions, I will be around to help and to answer.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of detailed questions on how you can advise also with some other counties in Kenya. So thank you again. And yes, we will also share some of your information on the RFS website as well. So thank you. And now I'm just going to do my best to share the screen. I'm not quite sure why it didn't work earlier. And I'm just going to move us on into the next session. So that was fantastic. So we've heard a nice case study. And is my screen okay? Mika, can you tell me?
Perfect.
Or Sabrina?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic.
Yep, perfect. Just maximize.
Then, thank you. So, let me just maximize. Yes, and here we go. So now what we'd like to do is going into the tools, we'd like to review the consultations that we've undergone. I'm just trying now to move the slides. La voila. But before I go into that, I just wanted to ask, now we just had a visitor from outside of the RFS, but we have a short poll to ask you, how much do you feel you know about the other country projects in terms of their work in policy and institutional areas? So if I could invite someone to—
Constance, would you be able to pull that up? We've lost co-host for the moment.
Yeah, no, I think all of us have. So maybe what I could invite you to do is to— You still are. Yeah, I think our hosting capacities have just left us. That's a pity. So let me just invite you in the chat box to say, how much do you feel like you know about what the other RFS country projects work is doing in policy and institutional areas? So is it like, I know a lot, or I know about a couple, or I feel like I'm working in my own space? And are we still seeing the slides?
We don't see it maximized, Constance.
Quite strange. Okay.
Do you want me to share?
I think so. Sabrina, you've been having much better luck. Is your power for good?
Power is, oh, I can't, yeah.
apologies. I'm a little bit confused about that. It's been working so far. Thank you, Sabrina. So one of the things, just while we're getting that screen up, is that we've heard from all of the countries about different tools and processes that might be of value going forward. And so we have mapped those into, Sabrina, are you bringing your screen up?
Yeah, I just need you to stop sharing.
Sorry, okay. So we've mapped these into just to highlight what kinds of tools you've already mentioned, and we've tried to tailor the entire training to fit that. We have developed a training framework according to the request that you've made. And so we have now, we're going to be spending this session on stakeholder mapping and influence and deepening relationships. And then next week, we're going to focus in on policy engagement and evidence-based decision-making. So right now, I just want to introduce the first tool, and that is on stakeholder mapping. And I'm going to, actually it's on systems mapping. And so in that one, I'm just going to run through quite quickly because I know we're short on time. I just want to reiterate that systems mapping is actually critically important for understanding your stakeholders, getting people's views out on the table that might be diverse views. And so we use it really as a basis of understanding both of the system within which we're working, but also in how we're related, our issues and our trends. So there's some key steps, which I don't think I need to go into, but we want to be very, very clear about the system that we're trying to understand. We want to diagram the system, and then that way we can use it. So just briefly, a systems map. So I could show you a very detailed farming systems, but rather I know a lot of you are working at the community and higher levels. But the farming system for most of us, or the pastoral system, is the base. So we just want to reinforce that underpinning that farming system is all of the environmental system. So the functioning ecosystem, and so both the farm influences the environment influences the farm, and then the farming system is also brought into an economic dimension of the system, so that you get in your full value chain. I know a number of you are working on the value chains, and that influences the money and economic, and then lastly, brings together the socio-cultural. So this helps you see that there are many, many types of stakeholders involved in just a simple farming system, pastoral system, or a wider landscape. And of course, underpinning that is the political system. And that political system can either enable or potentially disable. But the most important piece here is you map this with your colleagues. You try to map it as best possible with those people with whom you are in the system and those that are influencing the system, to start to look at influences. And so we can use this. Many, actually, a majority of us are working on land degradation issues, and land degradation is a huge environmental driver. So we could even see that land degradation has influences around the system that are either economic or social or environmental. And so as Victor's talked about, the immigration, the migration, the refugees, it has an impact on that as well. So I just wanted to show these very briefly and reflect that it's just very important that the stakeholders are working with you, and sometimes it's the conversations around the maps that are as important as the maps themselves. And I know that we have applications in RFS. For example, Eswatini has been working on land health monitoring related to the chieftain planning. And of course, Kenya's been working with diverse sectors and on priorities around the water catchment systems. So we've got two very, very good examples. And I think that leads us straight into stakeholder mapping. And so at this moment, what I would do is go straight to stakeholder mapping and invite Mika to introduce this topic.
Great,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Constance. And let me just open up my, okay, I hope that.
There's a lot of hope involved in this work.
Okay, yes, I think we're there. Can you see my screen?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to run through stakeholder mapping and then some stakeholder analysis. And this is responding particularly to a lot of discussions in the interviews where there was a lot of interest in either extending stakeholder mapping or reference to stakeholder engagement processes. So we're going to run through some tools, and then we'd like to hear a little bit more about some of the experiences. So stakeholder mapping is the first step, and it's around really mapping the individuals, the groups, the organizations that have a stake, that have either sort of interest or are affected by the topic or issue of focus. Now, this topic may change over time, and you may have a different stakeholder mapping process for a particular policy or institutional issue. And so we do this stakeholder mapping to identify stakeholders that are present and work out who needs to be engaged. So the key steps in the stakeholder mapping are clarifying the engagement focus and then mapping the stakeholders through surveys or participatory exercises. The first step is clarifying the engagement focus. And so this is really as a team to clearly articulate as a project the theme or topic for engagement. This may be an issue or policy area, and I can hear my children in the background. The other key element of the clarifying the engagement focus is also around the geographical area. So this is the level of interest. Are you looking particularly at a subnational area? So this could be a state or a district, or are you looking at the national level? So I think the stakeholder mapping may be different depending on the geographical area and the level of interest. So in terms of the mapping of stakeholders, this can be done in a number of different ways, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar and have done some level of stakeholder mapping. A very common way to do this is as a participatory exercise in a workshop. This can also be done in a meeting, as long as the people in the meeting have a good understanding of the stakeholders that are present. So the first step will be to list those stakeholders that are relevant to that particular topic or to that particular geographical area, and then to draw those stakeholders. So often we'll do this as circles on a flip chart paper, and the circles become bigger with the perceived importance of a particular stakeholder. And then stakeholders that may not be as important for that issue maybe have a smaller circle. And then the lines between the circles shows the relationship. So this may be a one-way relationship or a two-way relationship, and you can change the colors, etc., to show the different types of interactions. Another way that is can be quite useful, depending on the depth of information that you're looking for, is through surveys. And surveys can be administered either individual interviews, but that involves an enumerator or someone to go around. It can be very useful if you're trying to access decision makers that are at a high level that may not come to meetings or to workshops. You could also provide surveys at workshops, which is a very useful tool because then you can control the responses, or you can make sure that you're getting participants, and also through email. Email is obviously very easy, but the return rate is a little bit lower, and often you won't get as much feedback. This is just an example that we're currently using for the Kenya Agroforestry Strategy Development, where we're providing some technical support. And it's quite a simple version, just looking at the stakeholders that these individuals that you're interviewing or giving the survey to are engaged with, contact people, the role, and the level of importance. And this really helps us understand those stakeholders that are critical within the network. So just as a reflection, this can be a continual process. So for many of the different projects, there would have been some stakeholder mapping at the initial stages, and there's an ongoing stakeholder engagement process, but this can be something that is reviewed and updated. And as I mentioned, for particular policy issues or geographical focus or levels, you may want to review, and it helps support the engagement planning, which we're going to come to now. So the influence and power relations, we've listed it here as a separate tool, but really it's very interlinked. So with many of these different tools that we're showing, there's a relationship between them and they can be used in different combinations and will be familiar to many of you. So the influence and power relationships, or the stakeholder analysis, is the analysis and interpretation of the interests, the power and the relationships of and between the stakeholders. So this is really getting at how interested are the stakeholders that you're working with the topic that you're engaging with, and how powerful are they to determine the outcome of that particular topic. This is incredibly important for stakeholder engagement and management plans, to see which stakeholders are important and also impacted, but also to understand the relationships between them. So the steps for this is around conducting an analysis. And I'm going to show a few tools, which is a power interest grid, which many of you will be familiar with, and social network analysis, and then developing the plans out of that analysis. So this very colorful map here is a social network analysis map. So this is a stakeholder network that we developed for the agroforestry strategy for Kenya. So this came out of a survey of the relationships, the survey that I just showed you previously, the relationships between different stakeholders. And social network analysis is a slightly more complicated tool, but it's a sort of tool that you could easily upskill one of your project members or outsource to have the analysis done. It allows for a little bit more complexity than you can do in the hand-drawn versions. And it really gives some insights into the relationships and where the groupings are. So you can see very clearly here that there's some groups of stakeholders that are completely separate from the rest of the network. So each of these circles is a stakeholder. And the colors on this map show the type of stakeholder they are, if they're government, if they're private sector, if they're NGOs. And these numbers in the lines show the type of relationship. So from this type of analysis, you can work out which stakeholders have to be engaged. So they're very, very connected. They're very powerful in the network. But you can also start to see if there's relationships that you'd expect to be there. And in the context of Kenya, are the relationships between the national government and the county government there, where they should be, between the research centres and the ministries. So these are the types of gaps that if they exist, you would aim to fill them as part of your engagement plan. One of the other benefits of this type of mapping is that you can have a baseline and an end line, and therefore you can show the change over time and the influence of your engagement. Another tool is the power interest grid, which is quite popular and should be familiar to many of you. And you can get the information to populate the power interest grid through surveys or through knowledge of your team. And it's good to bring in some additional people so that they can maybe give you information about some additional stakeholders, so you've got a nice cross-section. And it's good to understand the stakeholders and their role, their interest and their power connected to policy, to resources, implementation of programs and information dissemination, so that these different elements can be captured. You can use a grid like this, and there are some different versions, but you can use a grid like this to plot out each of the stakeholders. So those stakeholders you have the list of, you can put them either on one of the lines around their power. Are they highly powerful, which means that they're very influential over the topic? And what is their interest? Is it high or low? And so depending on whether they have high power, high interest, low power, high interest, you would plot them on this graph. And it really brings into play that there are certain actors or stakeholders that you must engage in every part of the process, while there's others that are going to be heavily affected, but may not be as influential, but they should still be engaged in the process because the outcomes will impact them. You can also bring in the information from the social network analysis or any other analysis done by the team on the stakeholders. So then all of this information about the types of stakeholders, their power, their interests, their relationships, can be used to start developing the engagement planning. So this is an example of looking at where the players sit on the grid, how you would engage them. And this is around, are they managed very closely? Are they kept informed? Do you monitor and come back to it later? Do you need to engage them closely, but they may not turn up to the meetings because their interest levels may not be as high? So this is around creating your engagement plan to reflect the different types of stakeholders, but also recognizing that when you're developing your engagement plan, we also need to make sure that we're thinking about the connections between these different stakeholders. So if there is gaps in stakeholders, that's also part of a targeted engagement plan. Now, when we went through the interviews, there was a lot of experience. Tanzania, there was the interest to build upon the initial design documents. Burkina Faso, there was interest to undertake stakeholder mapping. Senegal, there was already some initial stakeholder and activity mapping. Nigeria has a detailed stakeholder engagement process, and Kenya, through the stakeholder platforms, also has a detailed process. But we wanted to ask, beyond this which we captured within the interviews, because we understand there's so much experience, is there, looking at these tools, how might you review your initial stakeholder identification and analysis process using some of these tools to fit your policy engagement work? So if we can use the chat box or raise your hand, we'd love to hear from some other examples of the potential to come back to some initial stakeholder mapping and analysis, to review and to align it to particular activities that you're undertaking at the moment. So I'll just stop sharing my screen there to allow the chat box.
So does anyone have a question they'd like to raise to Mika around some of the processes around stakeholder mapping, or for Constance on systems mapping? And also just responding to the question Mika's just posed around now you've seen just a sort of light touch on some of the methods around stakeholder mapping and looking at influence and power. Is there any maybe processes you would build upon in your project work, or something you would like to apply from scratch? So you can either raise your hand or just add anything to the chat box.
So
I see a hand
Enoch's
raised.
hand
Yep.
is raised.
Enoch, you have the floor. Enoch, do you want to go ahead? Mika's ready and waiting for your question. We can't seem to hear you, Enoch. If you want to put it in the chat box. But we heard you earlier. Any other questions? Daniel says, clear, Mika, great. So if there's no more, does anyone have any questions on the systems mapping? I know Constance didn't have a lot of time, but was also going to ask around if in your projects you had a chance to sort of break out what the maybe different systems dimensions you had done. If there's any questions around that, please continue to put in the chat box around any of these tools or methods or approaches as we go through them.
Excuse me, can I just speak?
Go ahead,
because it's a longish kind of question, besides the one that I was typing on the chat box. I just want to find out if anyone, any of the countries have an example of how to instill, the culture of documentation for knowledge management. I'm asking this because in a lot of instances, you will find that the data is there, but it is in people's minds. You come and they tell you that, oh, Patrick is on leave, and he's the one that knows, so most of the data is implicit and lies in people's minds, and is not documented or explicit. I think that is one of the reasons why we find it very difficult to get data from stakeholders, particularly at the country level. Thank you.
Great question, Lynn. So, I mean, I think, does anyone from the country projects have any examples where they've sort of addressed this issue of documentation, knowledge management in terms of, does anyone have a suggestion to offer up from one of the other countries, or any of the panelists have anything to offer? If not, I can try and give an example, just actually referring back to Takana. Lynn, this was actually, it's great you asked Victor that question about data, because that was one of the key things we started with. It is the same issue of, we were looking for poverty statistics or looking at statistics on like health, nutrition surveys, etc. And these were not run by partners. This was work that was done by the government. And again, it was someone had a ledger, someone had written it on paper, someone had it in their book, but then they took the book, someone had it on their desktop, etc. So I think what we just started to do was a very simple just information flow. So we started to map who was collecting and the frequency, and getting them to say at what kind of level of quality and where was that going. So that there was actually just a very basic understanding to start with. So if we took nutrition data, for example, just to say, okay, it was collected at a very community level, but by verbal surveys, household to household, that then went to the local dispensary. We then tracked that information was aggregated up to the local district level, etc. So I think the key thing we learned from kind of this level of engagement is that firstly, just understanding who's tracking the information and where is it going, and then kind of trying to come up with simple templates. So at the level where it's collected, maybe more verbally or by hand, not trying to immediately create a data management system, because that was a bit too much of a jump. But could we create a simple template that was a form that could be replicated? And then we worked from the county, from the statistical office to say, okay, when that data comes in, can we create a very simple Excel sheet that systemizes that data so that that's accessible to everybody and it's not just stuck on someone's desktop. So I think just to very quickly summarize, it would be to try and set up some templates, but before that, to just map where the information is coming and where the information is going. And then to say, okay, how could we maybe create more of a system around that? I don't know if any other countries have any other.
Thank you very much.
There was one from Benjamin around social network analysis tool. Benjamin, did you want to expand a little bit on your, if it's a comment or a question, and then we can try and add a little bit to that. Benjamin.
Hello?
Benjamin, you have the floor.
Hello.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Great.
For me, it's a comment, and also it's I also want to learn from other countries on their experiences in terms of the social network analysis. Yeah. So on this one, how have you integrated it with some other existing policy issues? Like for the case of our friends in Kenya, I know that they had some existing policy issues. So maybe if we, some of the contemporary tools that we can use. So how could you integrate these new or emerging tools with the already existing tools that are there? Thank you.
Did one of the countries want to give a response? Anthony, I'm not sure if you wanted to try to talk about how these sort of tools can be combined, and then I'm happy to add a little bit on the agroforestry strategy.
Thanks, Benjamin, for the question, and Mick for smoking me out. You know, I wanted get Tahi or our colleagues from the countries maybe to share a little bit of that, but I can go fast. Yeah, just like the experience have been shared before, we are not starting from zero. There is already some existing processes ongoing, and for us, it's much more looking at how best can you integrate and tag along what is existing, and then bring your issue and the priority focus to be in the center. And that is largely because for each project, there are specifics of what you are looking for in terms of what you want to achieve. And in that case, then my view is that it's understanding the context well enough so that you are not misinterpreted to be either duplicating or hijacking another interest group's agenda. And if the context analysis is done well, and then the mapping of the stakeholders have shared is good, then it's looking at, given that context, what are the best tools to help your issue, your agenda, your interest to be, right in the center and get the support you are looking for the key decision makers or the interest groups, so that they can rally along and support your agenda. And we have been very delicately trying to in Kenya to balance that, because we work in a devolved system and each of the counties have priorities. However, we still have national government with the departments, ministries, again, with a lot of mandate issues, cross-cutting. So it's a very delicate balance, and therefore it is very context specific. Maybe I would pause there, and maybe perhaps our colleagues, maybe Daniel, I don't know how you have managed to navigate this with the 4 counties. Daniel is the one who is leading our team on some of 4 themes we have been, we prioritize, and we have been trying to look at how do we get it to go to the next policy discussion level. Daniel, if it's not an ambush, perhaps maybe you may share with the team on your experiences through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. My name is Daniel. I work for Murang'a County Government as the Director, Agricultural Value Chains, Policy and Strategy. Let me say, I didn't really expect to speak, because much of what we are going through, to me, does not look very much new, because some of these tools, we have used them even before devolution in most of our projects. For example, what you are calling stakeholder analysis, as we are doing what you used to call the participatory rural appraisal, as we are doing what we call participatory poverty and livelihood analysis, other tools like participatory participatory analysis. Then there is still another tool that we are using currently. I'm forgetting the term is missing. But then in every project implementation, before we go into the project design, we have to go through these processes to ensure that we actually go to the community, identify the stakeholders. We also identify the importance of the stakeholders to the beneficiary communities. The same tools that we are using in that quadrant to fix each stakeholder, where each stakeholder is, the importance, and how close the stakeholder is to the project community. We do all that mapping before we actually come to do project implementation. I've not seen a project that we have implemented in Kenya, not even in what I'm assisting Nairobi Water Fund doing, but within the county government, we have used a number of tools over years. Of course, they get overtaken every time, and every other cycle there is a new tool. For example, the one I'm forgetting, there is a tool now that we are using to ensure that we are engaging in what we are calling a National Agriculture and Livestock project in NARIG, National Agricultural Inclusive Growth Project. Before implementing, we send teams to the ground. They map all the stakeholders. They map the resources. They map they segregate the community in terms of the vulnerables, the well-to-do, and the resources that are available in that community, the resources that are lacking, and what needs to be brought on board. So that's why I am saying I'm not seeing as if they are entirely new tools. They are only labeled differently, but we have used these tools even in policy development. Because like now, currently in what I'm engaged in, we are developing, I'm assisting in development of policy as a policy consultant. And before you even decide what you need, the first thing is once the agenda is set, you go to the community to pick up the raw data and ensure that what you have set as agenda is actually the priority of that particular community. They actually almost come to identify the solutions. Your role is only to interpret that raw data into a policy context. That is my take. Thank you.
Excellent,
Hi,
Daniel.
Constance.
Thank you
I'm
so
sorry,
much.
I'm not raising my hand,
Lynn?
but I suppose I can speak. I just wanted to, sort of add to the tools, that can be used to collect data that can, also populate the dashboard. For example, currently, besides the land health data that we are, collecting, another team within the project is also collecting health and nutrition data, across the project area. So I think it's such tools and such surveys.
Lynn, I think we've lost you.
Yeah, I think we've lost Lynn. Perhaps
Lynn,
she can
can
type
you
the
still
question
hear
into-
us?
More
Just
data for us.
Oh, Lynn, I think we only caught a bit of that. Can I just, yeah, go ahead.
Maybe let me write it on the chat box.
Superb. And just to clarify, on the next webinar, we're going to focus specifically on the evidence side of things, and we're going to go in deep, I promise you. Okay? All right. I think if there are not any other questions, shall we move on to other tools? If you agree, then Sabrina, I'll go ahead and share my screen and see if I can make it work better this time. And step 3, okay. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about now is to go into more detail on causal analysis. We're going to come back to visioning next time, and we're also going to share any slides that we missed today with everyone. So causal analysis, the main
Constance,
yes?
we can only see your back screen again. So would you like me to share my screen and you can?
Yes, please. That would be fantastic. Okay. I'm stopping sharing, and I'm just going to start causal analysis as we go to save time. So one of the main things, and I think people have talked about the onion method, and one of the main things about causal analysis is it really helps you unpack whether you're addressing a symptom or a barrier. And specifically, once you've identified your desired policy outcome or your desired multi-stakeholder outcome, then you can dig in to better understand the causal analysis. So the main steps include, so for the next slide, the main steps include brainstorming on your barriers, identifying the initial causes, considering the implications of the barrier, and then looking across the causes to understand the various dimensions, socioeconomic, etc., to see who really has to be at the table for problem solving. So if I go to the next slide, it just shows that you would do a brainstorm of the many barriers that are keeping you from achieving your policy or vision from it going forward. And then you start to unpack it. So I've chosen water quality, water scarcity right now, because it's one that many of us are dealing with. And so on the bottom half, you can see the causes. And here, what you're seeing is if I were to map these causes by asking, why is that and why is that, I end up with causes that are related even back to such things as a lack of conservation orientation, sometimes greed, exploitation by corporations or others. And you get a single sector orientation, which can lead to a lack of effective management policies. You may have unsustainable agricultural practices, which may fall on the shoulders of not really having the opportunities to raise awareness and build information. And then, of course, you have the biophysical issues such as poor land management, which lead to the loss of biodiversity, etc. So the bare ground and ultimately reduced rainfall infiltration. Now, one of the quick questions I'd like to ask the group. So we've just talked about a multiple of types of causes, but I'm wondering, has anyone experienced or could share a quick example of when there was actually either a perception by maybe one group of stakeholders, a belief, a strongly held belief that kept you from achieving your desired outcome or your policy outcome? Because we have to take these into account. So for example, I'll give one. One is if people have a very strong bias against refugees. That is a worldview that is also can keep you from achieving your desired outcome. It's a worldview that is blocking the capacity to work together to move forward. And so if you have had an experience with that, or can share an example of that in your working context, I would just invite you to put that into the chat box. Thank you. And in the meantime, I will move forward and we can come back to this because it is an important one. The other aspect of causal analysis is really understanding the implications if you don't treat the root causes, if you don't get at those base causes. And as we're starting to see in the next slide is that we have are now addressing not just water scarcity, we are addressing environmental, institutional, political, economic, and social issues, all of which are having very exacerbated outcomes related to water scarcity in this case. And in the next slide, I just would mention that once you see that you have all of these root causes, then you can start to identify the stakeholders that would have to be in the moment to help problem solve. So you can see that it would be a diversity. In the case that I was building, I came with an enormous number of stakeholders that would have to help to cause this problem. And thus you build strong stakeholder relationships across those for problem solving, as well as across sectors, as Victor has already mentioned. So I think that with the next slide, I just want to show that building a causal analysis is a very simple exercise, can just be done at home with a group of people and on just a sheet of paper, just to look at those causal relationships and how they move forward. And so with that, I would just move to, I believe, the last slide. And my reflection is that causal analysis really helps you understand system linkages. It helps you break down problems, and it helps you identify different stakeholders to work on solutions. And because you're thinking in systems, the tool helps spark greater innovation. And with that, Mika, I just wanted to mention that one of our RFS colleagues has mentioned that they have competing visions between national and provincial levels. And this, they need to facilitate dialogue processes to deal with conflicting objectives. So between defining a very good vision or policy outcome and doing a causal analysis, you start to get more people on board. So with that, I will stop this presentation. And I believe we probably would like to move on to the next session and come back to questions a bit later. Thank you so much.
Shall I share my everybody?
Yes, Emily, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll try my best. Oh, yes.
And while Emily is sharing her screen, we're getting some really nice responses to the questions about what Constance was presenting on in terms of root causes and some different perceptions and beliefs. And Emily will now take us into the second part of the toolkit more around deepening relationships.
Thank you, Sabrina. Can you all see my screen?
Super.
Okay, great. So multiple stakeholder platforms is something that most of the country projects are involved in some way or another, something we're quite familiar with. So what is it? It's really about mechanism and space for collaborating and establishing partnerships or alliances between different interest groups. And this can be from private sector, different government institutions, civil society, and scientists. And so these are processes that are purposefully organized to be interactive, and so we can foster participation in dialogue and in decision-making about shared challenges, policy, and implementation actions. And so we have to say first that there are many different types of multiple stakeholder platforms. Their roles and mandate will vary a lot. You have some that are more at regional or district level, some that are national, some even transboundary. But the aim is to develop collaborative decision-making and processes which take with different levels of governance. So that we can have these shared perspectives, build a new understanding and commitment for a solution, as we know are very complex, complex solutions to complex problems. So really it's about unlocking people's potential to cooperate and innovate together to reach sustainable development goals. So this, rather than take some key steps in how we establish these multiple stakeholder platforms, just wanted to highlight some of the key points about running or implementing or running successful multiple stakeholder platforms. And one of it is about defining the scope, the mandate, and especially importantly in the start is to design the engagement strategy. And for this, you can use several tools that have already been shown to you today or highlighted today, and that will be in the toolbox in the end. But it's really about how important the situation analysis and the stakeholder mapping is to really tease out what are inequity issues in decision-making process and also benefit sharing. And that's very important to tailor it because we know, and as Anthony was saying a little bit earlier, how important it is to tailor things to the context. We are not operating in same political context with the same actors, so very important to look at power dynamics that can be in terms of gender, ethnicity, poverty, but also not forgetting to look at history of past and present initiatives, what has happened to ongoing platforms, because some of them become dormant, then are reactivated through another round of funding. So important to take stock of how these things have worked in the past. We also know there's different governance level. Not all countries have the same commitment to decentralization or not the same democratic makeup or institutional landscape. So really taking that into account is key. We know, for example, from the consultations that we have several reports on multiple stakeholder platforms, for example, from Nigeria. Senegal is an interesting example. They've revitalized 2 sets of platforms that were existing, but that were not operational. And Eswatini also formed the National Irrigation and Drainage Committee. So we see how different these multiple stakeholder platforms can have in terms of their aim. Another key point for successful multiple stakeholder platform is all about social capital, how we build these trust relationships, how we have a common strategy. So here you can use visioning, root cause analysis, outcome mapping to help gather some consensus and acknowledgement of issues, especially between groups that may not agree. Very good to use future scenarios to identify goals, to agree on what is the transformation strategy and what needs to be done and by who. And very importantly, how to secure, how important it is to secure commitment to processes by building consensus and getting political will. And this is also very much linked to the future of these platforms and ownership of these platforms beyond a project life. For the implementation of action, obviously the building the capacity of key stakeholders is very important, not only in leading, but in delivering. Some of these actions may be more complex. So very important also, since it is about multiple stakeholders, to bridge between those that live in communities that know about the field with those that make decisions at policy level. So field exchange visit can be very important. Co-designing, again, agreeing on problems and on strategy is something that has to be done collaboratively. And another issue is how to feedback evidence, so between the different levels, between national and subnational policy levels. So in Niger, they've had a very good success in some of their regional platforms to influence and actually embed sustainable land management principles in the local community plans. In Malawi, there was opportunity under the Watershed Committee and good relationship with national bodies to create the multiple stakeholder platform. And in Uganda, there's also experience in developing these platforms at local level. So we have quite a wide range of experiences that we look forward to hearing more about. So last point, I think on this is how important the reflective and iterative learning cycles are, because you start out with some decisions and these need to be reviewed. So adaptive management here is the key, to be able to monitor progress against the agreed criteria of successes and indicators that were put in place. And the creation of a learning culture and environment to generate lessons. And I think this came across, and we will address some of this in the next webinar about integration of evidence. And so, yes, knowledge co-creation, communication, feedback, loop mechanism, very important, and multi-directional. What happens at local level needs to be fed back nationally and vice versa. So I know, unfortunately, the Ethiopian team is not able to join because of communication problem, but I think I would like Mike to say a little bit about the experience Ethiopia's had with the multiple stake platforms in the 12 districts and how their partnership has been working.
So we were very much hoping that our Ethiopian colleagues would be online, but due to some of the internet outage, we haven't been able to have contact with them for a little while. One of the lessons that came out of the interview, one of the lessons that came out of the interview with Ethiopia was that in the 12 districts where their project is operating, they've developed these platforms, these multi-stakeholder platforms that are led by the local government, but also have other actors involved. And they've used these platforms to be able to start scaling out the work. So it's heightened the engagement and involvement of local players. And so they've been replicating that work. They've also managed to integrate the universities and the research centers and used it as this platform for learning and replication. So I just wanted to very briefly say that we can contact the Ethiopia team later, and I hope they'll join for the next webinar. But it's a very great example of how a multi-stakeholder platform can actually be used to scale out the effective work that's being undertaken.
Thank you, Mike. Oops. Yeah, so just one last point, and this was raised in several of the interviews and the consultation that we conducted, is about, yes, these platforms, they work fine when we have a program and funding, but what is their sustainability once the program is, who has ownership to continue? So I think this is very important. Some reflection is how to periodically review what are the achievements and the outcomes in relation to the goals, and also how to secure human and financial resources and the political commitment to keep implementing these multiple stakeholder platform. And I think this is something for which none of us have a ready solution, but I think we would like to hear very much from a Kenyan experience here with the Water Fund Trust and other platforms, because they have been able to bring in the private sector to ensure sustainability. So can I call on Anthony Kariuki to just give us a little bit of an insight into how the Water Fund Trust and other platforms have been have ensured some sustainability? Thank you.
And Anthony, you're welcome to pass the baton. I just put your name into the ring. We wanted to hear about the endowment and the sustainability that you're embedding within the platform.
Thank you, Emery, and the team. Yeah, I think upfront is for projects, the governance or instruments of implementation in terms of platforms or committees may be project specific. And for that, early on decisions on what would be the ultimate space for that kind of a structure need to be agreed ahead of time, so that we do not run into the dilemma of what happens after the project. But from my experience, before I come to Nairobi Water Fund, is that there isn't any good project, if it's well designed, that should not have a home. In this case, I mean, it's either a community structure, existing government institutions or frameworks or structures. And why these tools are important, like have been shared, is so that at the context level, that is already upfront determined. So that the makeup of that instrument, whether it's a committee or a platform or whatever it will be, its legal or governance nature is predetermined on how will it evolve and where will it rest at the end. And therefore, the right key stakeholders or financing mechanism are thought upfront, and then it develops during the project period, and at the exit of the project, it can be able to be on its own. Why am I saying this is because for the Nairobi Water Fund, the multi-stakeholder platform was a design issue. Based on experiences from other water funds by TNC in other areas, there are three options. One, it can be in a government department, and there are many that are already successful and they have been embedded as such. Second, it can even be, like now for Nairobi Water Fund, as a new creation. And how this was arrived at was from a visioning process, that in the watershed that we are taking care of, there are already existing stakeholders with clear mandates. But it was identified that the gap was, even when there is mandates across the various agencies, and I don't have to name them here, there was a gap in terms of who actually takes care of the watershed from a scale perspective. If you look at the devolution, each of the county has a mandate for the geographical area within their jurisdiction. If you look for agencies like our Kenya Wildlife Service or Kenya Forest Service, again, is delimited with the jurisdiction geographically. But the watershed does not respect those boundaries as such. It's a natural hydrological drainage system. And early on, therefore, the people at the table agreed that for it to be sustainable, a new framework needs to be thought through. And it's at that time then they explored several options under the Kenyan policy and law environment, and agreed that for private, public, farmers, everyone to sit on the same platform, it needs to be not embedded in any of the existing infrastructure. And that is how they ended up with what we are now calling a trust. That is basically a public good platform. and in its governance defined earlier on how the leadership, the participation will be. So it is 51 stakeholder driven and 49 government. So that already created a framework within how and in which way that the different stakeholders would aggregate. Now, the second thing after the governance and the legal framework was agreed on was how will it be financed. And I think as Emily already shared, during the program or project, facilitation, including resources, capacities, and other resources usually is available. But by the end of the project, whose baby is it? So that again was also thought upfront, and that is how the endowment pillar was brought in as the third leg of the sustainability. And in itself, that funds will be raised during the project implementation with a view that there is an exit. And here we are looking at the 4th year of the project, that there will be a pool of funds that will be managed by the platform, but through the open market system. So our idea is that we are investing these resources, what we are calling the endowment funds, in the open markets. And then the responsibility of the leadership, those are the trustees, to make sure that they hit a certain minimum of return. So then that the endowment funds will be held in perpetuity, but the interest accrued over time will be the one that will be running the operations and activities of the fund, of the trust fund going forward. But more importantly, the stakeholders around the table have already now synced in on how they leverage. We are very proud of the county governments that are bringing in kind, huge resources that already existed, but now channeled to support in a shared goal of how do we take care of the livelihoods of the people in the upstream and integrate in it the environmental sustainability of services, but more importantly, in a shared governance space. So then it does not necessarily mean that you put your dollar into this other person's purse, but you bring it together in a shared activity plan, vision, and co-implement and co-manage and so there is a lot of that bit I think the tools are speaking to, and that is built over time to buy to buy in the trust, all those things that goes into it. So it takes a better time. And that's why my question to Kana was, how long did the process take? Because I think those are some of the good lessons you like to pick out to inform for those who are looking for this kind of, to be realistic upfront, how much time, how much effort and resources will be required to make sure that that will be sustainable by the end of it all. I know I can talk about this until tomorrow, so let me pause there, and if there are specific questions, I can respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is very insightful and inspiring, so really thank you for sharing that. Unfortunately, we have very little time left, but I think the same way as we did for Victor and Turkana, if people have questions to you, they can use the chat box too. So I just want to attempt sharing my screen for one last common question to everybody. Oops. Thank you. So register in your chat box. So if you could do, I think most of you are involved with multiple stakeholder platforms. So if you could do anything differently with your platform or creating it, what would it be? Could you register an answer, please, for us in the chat box? Thank you very much. Constance, over to you.
Emily, I think let's rest here. We can come back to this. I'm really interested to continue to explore the MSDs, and we'll come back to power relationships next time. And so if you put your question back up, can you provide?
Sorry.
Thank you so much. If you could change one thing differently with your MSP or in creating it, what would it be? Looking back, how would you change it? And here we take just, we want to see if there's a few minutes, if anyone wants to share how they've done it. To see, are there any hands up?
Oh, sorry.
How would you like to change the MSPs you've been involved in?
Or if there's any questions from country projects that are thinking of setting up a more structured, they might have not called it a multi-stakeholder platform, but if they're thinking of setting up something quite structured around bringing stakeholders together in a kind of consortium, is there any questions for those countries such as Uganda or Tanzania that are getting, getting going and getting their work plans in place? If they have any questions on sort of process or anything like that, please let us know.
Thank you, Paul. Carry out a comprehensive stakeholder mapping and analysis using the relevant tools. Absolutely, that would be a huge advantage. So Alfred is asking, what are the key steps in creating an MSP? So we didn't go through the very specific steps. We talked about the principles, the lessons, and the tools that you can use in different ones, but I don't know if, Emily, you want to add there.
Sure, I think we can detail some more and there will be space in the toolbox. So it's really good that you raised that point. I think it's just because they can be so different in their nature, in their scope, but we will make sure to highlight some steps in the initiation, in the implementation, in the reflection. Thank you.
Josh's question is absolutely pertinent, and we did hear it coming in from a number of the interviews, is how do you manage potential conflicts of interest in an MSP? And I'll be honest with you, with 2 minutes left, I'd love to spend more time on it. And so as the organizing team, we'll make sure to start in that place at the next training. We don't want to keep everyone overtime. And so, but we do have a session on that, and we'll promise to bring it back to you. I'm wondering if we should, resourcing, defining early on what counts as leverage, excellent point. And finding out whether the stakeholders have a willingness to truly participate, and particularly in the case of dashboards. So I think now I would turn it over to Sabrina, who is going to help us move towards the end.
Sorry, it would help if I unmuted. Thank you so much to everybody for the questions they registered. And we are, just to reiterate, we will be sharing the slides. We'll be sharing the recordings, and then as part of the training, we have obviously these 2 virtual webinars, but there will be a accompanying support structure in terms of the shared team working with FAO, in terms of responding to these deeper questions that we're getting, and how we can take some of these areas forward. So just to quickly run over next, we will be meeting in 2 weeks' time, and we'll be focusing the second webinar around policy engagement and evidence. So I know we've had quite a few questions today that have come up on evidence. We've also had this area around conflict and power. So we'll be using a lot of the session to try and maybe answer those things, as well as diving a little bit more into how you actually bring in evidence to the decision process, and then how that can impact in terms of policy outcomes, and going through step by step in terms of setting up things such as key steps around advocacy, the co-design of dashboards and decision platforms, and then also cross-sectoral evidence. And also we will be sharing a template tomorrow, where we would ask for some feedback from the country teams if there's something else they would still like to see that maybe that came out of the interviews that they've not seen in the training yet, or anything else specifically that they would want covered under wider political, institutional, multi-stakeholder platform work you have going on. and we'll be sending out an email to all the teams tomorrow to gather that. I would just like to ask, in terms of closing up, in maybe 2 learning outcomes, maybe even 1 is fine, but just in the chat box, if you can register something you learned, 2 things would be great, but whether it's from one of the tools or methods, whether it was from one of the presentations or from one of the other country projects, if you can all just register some of your key learning, this would be really valuable just to see the traction that was picked up in the first part of the training. And with that, I would also like to hand over to Anne-Sophie. As mentioned, this is a joint collaboration between FAO, who are leading on component 1 around the science policy interface and the component, and we are partnering in terms of the Shared Decision Hub to deliver the training. So Anne-Sophie, from FAO's perspective and component 1, we'd very much welcome you to have some closing remarks. And if there's anything else you wanted to mention about the further work of the component and how we'd be maybe taking some of these aspects forward.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you to the whole team and to all of you. I'm very excited that we are doing this work together and that FAO was able to fund and co-organize this training, partnering with Shared and with ICRAF. It's been fascinating to hear also all the country experiences, and that we see this really as a platform for the 12 country teams in particular to interact with each other and start sharing lessons around the policy and institutional issues. We've heard a lot of questions coming up, in particular on power relations, which I think is hugely important and sometimes a major difficulty that we come across when we do this kind of work at field level, and you know, how they relate to how multi-stakeholder platforms can be managed more effectively, what resources are needed and how do you organize resources. The Kenya case was very interesting in that respect, and we've heard a lot of innovations from Kenya today, both from Victor and from TNC, and we would have loved to hear more from Ethiopia. Unfortunately, the situation in Ethiopia is what it is right now, so it was not possible to hear from them firsthand. But really, we see this training as a co-produced training, meaning not just by FAO and ICRAF and Shared, but by all of the 12 country teams with us as well, where you are as much a source of expertise as we are in a lot of respects. The FAO and Shared team has a lot of tools available and a lot of experience to share, but all of you equally has shared with us fascinating experiences and trial and errors and successes when we had the 12 country interview process before this training, and that has helped shape the way we've structured the training moving forward. So I just like to say that this is also only a beginning. As Constance, Sabrina, Mika and Emily have shared a few times in throughout the 2 hours, we will be sharing a toolbox that will contain all of this material and more. It's a lot to digest. It's obvious that there's so many tools and we've gone through so much in this short span of 2 hours. So all of this will be shared, and the lessons from and the comments and the questions that have been made also in the webinar. We'll have, as Sabrina just mentioned, a questionnaire to follow on tomorrow, and we'll give you an appointment in 2 weeks' time to continue with the next session. But also we'll be on a regular engagement process with the country teams, because this is our main mandate as the hub, as FAO leading the component 1 of the hub on policy and institutions with our colleague UNEP. this is our mandate to work collaboratively and support the country teams. So the FAO shared team will be available in the next few months to continue engaging with you. And if you need also tailored support for your country on some of the tools and how to apply them, please reach out, and we'll be happy to dialogue with you and support you. So we don't want to take too much more of people's time, and I'm again really excited to see all of you virtually and being able to hear some of you, and we look forward to this continuous engagement in the next few months. See you in 2 weeks.
Super. Thanks so much, Anne-Sophie. Thanks very much for those closing remarks. Yeah, just as our ticket out, I mean, usually if we were with you guys in a room or if we were all together in the same place, we would love the chance to hear any final comments. And so, yeah, if you have any comments from the training team, I've just seen Alfred has just done one, for example, a colleague from Uganda they would like to include in the next training. Anything like this, please just include. And as Anne-Sophie mentioned, we'll be seeing you in 2 weeks' time for the second webinar. We will be making sure to take all the feedback, the questions, the approaches, the key steps, etc., into the design of that training. And as mentioned, you will get an email tomorrow with all the links to the resources and also a feedback form on some of the tools and anything you would like to see in 2 weeks' time. And going forwards, if there's anything broader you want to mention in terms of potential support or key areas as a country project you might want to dive into. And thank you just for your time from all of the training team, from FAO Shared. Thank you very, very much for the engagement and both coming into this webinar and all the lessons learned and shared. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, and you'll hear from us quite a bit in between. So thank you very, very much.
So if anyone wants to share their screen and wave, I've been so enjoyed being with you. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for sharing your experience.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.
Bye, bye, bye.
Wishing everyone a safe, stay safe.
Bye, 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 bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, 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 bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Alfred.
Bye.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Thanks again, Victor. You stayed on.
And the SML team has just asked about the assignment, and we're going to be sending a feedback form tomorrow as part of the email.
Yes.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Oh,
Thank
Victor,
you,
you
Victor.
stayed. Bye. Thank you, Victor.
I'm still here, yes. I was just listening. It's very interesting.
We'll see you again on Thursday.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Victor.
Ciao.
I
Ciao,
see
everyone.
Is
Stay
that a hand
safe.
up or a wave goodbye? Constance, as Sabrina and I both lost connectivity briefly, and you're a host, would you be able to save the chat?
I am working
asked
on
Gibson
that right
too.
now. Thank you
I
for
think
that.
Gibson will, but just in case.
Yeah, back up. Yes, okay, great.
I've got half.
Bye,
Okay.
Masiko.
Bye.
Mina.
Tislani, sorry we didn't hear from you, but nice you've logged
Next
on from
time.
Malawi.
Superb.
Thanks,
Thank
Stephen,
you,
from
everyone.
Uganda. Bye, Joseph.
Superb. Stephen, it was great to see you. See you next time. Enoch, thank you.
Hopefully we can hear Enoch next time.
I hope so.
Okay, so I'm gonna log off. I'll see you guys in
about
Okay,
Jupiter.
and I think we'll stop the
5 minutes?
recording here. Mika, can you stop
Yes.
the recording?
I've just
And-
pressed stop cloud recording.